Rise of the Ronin, if only you released in early March. Unfortunately, this game released the same day as a far superior open world game, which is Dragon's Dogma 2. On top of that, even the people that enjoy this game find the experience to be very meddling. And if I'm being perfectly honest, this game was a very hard sell for me. Like, the idea of an open world samurai game already had me on board. It's the fact that Team Ninja was behind it that had me cautious. I am not a fan of the Nioh franchise or Wukong or pretty much anything Team Ninja puts out. Myself and others were very confused whether or not the game was going to be at steady 60 frames, the god-awful horse animation so close to the game's release. There was just a lot of things that were concerning. And you know what? When I first started playing this game, I thought it sucked. The intro is laughably bad with one of the worst tutorials I have ever experienced in a video game. You're just coming to terms with the controls and the game's throwing boss fights at you and having you swap between two characters in the middle of combat. It's a goddamn mess. But despite that, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was a good game. So I kept playing and I kept playing and I slowly started to get the hang of things. I think I maybe had to get like 5 hours into the game and then it clicked. The combat feels tight, the controls for your character feel even tighter. There's all sorts of little details that you don't usually see in an open world game. Like the sound effects for your walking changes based on the shoes that you're wearing. And if you fight enemies with your fists or wooden weapons, it won't kill them. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start at the beginning. The combat is absolutely brutal. There's like 50 different weapons, all with 50 different stances. But the irony is that almost all of the battles play out the exact same. These developers have kind of struck gold with the Nioh formula, which means that the studio is playing to all of their strengths rather than taking risks. Like, a problem that I have with Nioh, Wukong, and all of that crap is I feel like the combat is needlessly complicated. Take, for example, a game like Ghost of Tsushima. You basically have 4 different stances to fight against 4 different specific enemy types. It doesn't go any further than this, but instead it makes things complicated by throwing all of those enemy types at you and seeing how you deal with it. Now, Rise of the Ronin essentially has like 8 different stances for every single weapon type. So how do you balance something like that without making it needlessly complicated? The answer is you don't. You just make the combat very, very simple at the bottom layer. Essentially, combat boils down to picking the stance that does extra damage to that specific enemy that you're fighting. That's literally it. The stances don't matter outside of that up arrow. I mean, each of the different stances does have their own like power attacks, which is kind of important because the hitboxes in this game are extremely accurate, meaning that you can use a power attack to dodge and attack at the same time. But I think one of the reasons why I prefer Ghost of Tsushima's stance swapping is because you don't get any slow-mo in Rise of the Ronin. So every time you get into battle, you kind of just gotta back away from your target while you figure out which stance is the most optimal. Now, the other reason why a lot of this doesn't really matter is because of the parry system. I'm not typically a big fan of counterattacks. I think my Dark Souls Elden Ring brain just likes to dodge roll instead. But there's something about the counter system in this game that really feels rewarding compared to other games. You can block most attacks except for critical strikes from enemies, in which case you can dodge out of the way or parry them. But the cool thing is that technically you can parry every single attack in an enemy's combo, which is a fantastic way of building up their stagger and subconsciously makes you very, very aware of the attack patterns of the enemies. As you play through the game, you're slowly studying them. And I think when the combat system really clicked with me was when I was fighting this big sumo dude. He had me on the ropes and very quickly I was able to turn the tide with a couple good parries. The other thing that really surprised me about Rise of the Ronin is just how much of an RPG it is. You got pretty much the exact same loot pool system of Nioh, but you're also passively leveling up the weapons that you use. Now, another big question a lot of people have about this game is because it's got the Nioh devs behind it, is it a Soulslike? yes and no. Like, it's not advertised as a Souls-like, but it does actually have some weird Souls-like mechanics that aren't explained very well. The fast travel banners in the game essentially act as bonfires, but something that the game doesn't teach you, which I learned the hard way, is as you gather up your XP, you actually have to turn it in at one of those banners. If you don't and you die, you lose all the XP that you obtain. Why? Why is this in this game? Because Nioh did it? I'm all for them trying to figure out some way of punishing the player for death, but come on. But the one thing that I would genuinely criticize is the combat is kind of all this game's got going for it. Exploration is just generic open world, go from point A to point B, grab collectibles for the sake of completionists. Sometimes you'll do like a mission for somebody that'll end up giving you a rare piece of gear, but none of that matters because it's an RPG and you'll just get better gear eventually later on. One positive note about the downtime of exploration is it does give you time to reflect on the combat system. I think one of the reasons why I struggled so much with the Nioh games is because you are constantly under fire. I never got a moment to rest and let my brain process just what the heck was going on. But let's move on to the story. Personally, I don't think it's bad, but I don't think it's good either. It's quite forgettable. Like, if there's one thing that kind of sucks with the story, it's the pacing. Things just kind of happen without any context or explanation prior. It's pretty disappointing because the voice acting is actually really good, despite the fact that the character animation is so stiff.
I let Mrs. Fumi escape, though it may cost me my life. That was the right thing to do. Yes, I am sure of it.
I find it really hard to get invested in these characters when they look like robots, but I know the real life significance of characters like Sakamoto Ryoma, so I can't help but follow him in his rise against the shogunate.
All I know is that I have to do all I can to forge a new Japan.
But one thing I do genuinely applaud the developers for doing in this game is making your choices feel like they matter. Like, there was this one mission where I came across this thief guy. He was basically one of the first bosses, and the game kind of heavy-handedly tells you you should kill him. And so I like to go against expectations with these types of games and go against the developers, so I denied that and I said, no, I'm gonna let this guy live. So some time passes and I stumble upon what I thought was a random quest where some dude's like, hey, there's some bandit up at the church, he's killing a bunch of people. I go over there and lo and behold, it's the same dude. I spared his life and he's at it again. So what do I do when the game ends up presenting me with the option? I spare his life again. And instead, I turn around and I start killing the dude that asked me for help in the first place with the bandit guy at my side. And then after I did that mission, suddenly that bandit was a buddy of mine that I could take on missions with me. Now, did that end up actually impacting the story in any way, shape, or form? No, not really, but it was just kind of cool that it had this chain of events that could have been cut off completely if I killed him right away. At least I assume. Maybe the game would have forced him to escape or something. But the game continually did things like this that would surprise me, where you could befriend one character and betray another. It was really intricate and very surprising. Even the main quest ended up having a handful of pivotal choices that did change the outcome. Now, speaking of the story missions, they're few and far between and seem to be very short. Like, there's a lot of side missions that take place in the overworld, but then the main story missions are kind of really short levels. And what's kind of disappointing is that the story missions are the only aspect of the game where you can play co-op with other people, which is awesome, but I wish I could just explore the open world with my friends instead. Now, one thing that I will say this game does that most open world games don't do is when you replay a story mission, you'll actually get more rewards. There's incentive to replay story missions on higher difficulties so that you can get more money and get better gear. But would I recommend it, especially considering the steep price of a PS5 exclusive? Yeah, If you got time to kill and if you just want to play a generic open world game, it's pretty good. If you enjoyed Ghost of Tsushima or enjoy Assassin's Creed Ubisoft games, you're probably going to enjoy Rise of the Ronin. This is a game I thought I would hate, but the more I played it, the more I loved it. I give it a very high score. Thanks to Ghost of Tsushima's wild success, it has inspired studios to come out of hiding and make more open world games in Japan. We probably won't hear anything about Rise of the Ronin at this year's Game Awards or anywhere else for that matter, but I'm really glad I played it.
I will listen to my heart and walk the path we believed in.
I'm going gambling.